All right. Thank you, Brendan, for joining us today. So I'm having you on to talk about a few different things, but I guess for a little bit of background, you've been involved in BSV since before it was BSV. I've known you for pretty much my whole existence inside of the Bitcoin world publicly. I've learned a lot from you. I know a lot of people have learned a lot from you. So do you want to introduce yourself? Something else that I haven't said, I guess, kind of who you are, what you do, and then I'll go into our topics here.
Sure. I mean, I guess you've probably covered a lot of it. I got into this probably, what a lot of people would consider late. So 2017, I actually bought my first ever BTC 4 days after the Bitcoin Cash split. Quickly worked out, this is BS. These people are crazy. There's a civil war. Whose side am I on? Well, that's pretty easy. These guys are the ones who actually know what they're doing. And sort of at the time was ready to jump into something new and just got the feeling that this was going to be a social and informational revolution. And, that's really what we can see is coming, is that it's going to be a revolution in how we exchange information, how we communicate with each other. And so, yeah, I'm just in with both feet, and really since then doing as much as I can to try and show what's possible. And, from running stress tests to starting my own company to build on the technology and working with the Bitcoin Association to produce these educational resources. And, it's just been a tremendous process, personally, in terms of my own growth and education, as well as, getting to meet all of the really amazing people that are in this space, and, obviously including yourself, and just having a really good time, mostly. There are moments where it's like, what am I doing? But at the same time, it's, it's been a fabulous, what is it? It's almost, must be 4 years now since I went all in. So yeah, it's been pretty amazing.
Well, something I've always, I've noticed about you just from afar on the internet is that you are definitely someone that seems to just dive into information. Like even I think you're the only person still participating in Craig's book club on Slack, which I gave up on quite quickly because I could not keep up with all of those long ancient Greek textbooks and stuff. So I wanted to have this conversation with you. Okay, there you go.
Thanks, Craig.
Yeah, there you go. So I want to do this anyway for a while, just because, obviously working with you at the Academy stuff, I outside of that too, but I'm well aware as to how much you've taken seriously, like diving into Bitcoin and learning about it. But let's just start there. So we both do work with the Bitcoin SV Academy, which I think even in BSV, some people don't, really use it or know what it is or have participated in it. So yesterday we publicly announced that the infrastructure course was live, and you pretty much were the main architect of that. So could you just talk about, well, maybe I'll let you just do an introduction on what the Academy is, what the courses are that are out there, and then if you could just, shill the infrastructure course a little bit and what's in there.
Sure. I guess the Academy came out of this sort of idea that I guess Raylene, who is the program manager of the Academy, and myself came up with back in 2019, which was a place where people could come to really learn properly the fundamentals of Bitcoin in a way that was carefully managed, very curated. We wanted to be 100% certain of everything that we put into those courses. And I think probably what a lot of people don't realize is just how much we are reaching out to experts across the ecosystem to bring them in to review this content before it ever sees the light of day. And while we're always constantly tweaking the language and things like that, the actual factual content of those courses has been verified and re-verified by the best people in the business. And I certainly consider it an enormous privilege to work with those guys to bring this out to you. But the Academy is essentially designed to be a way for professionals who want to really understand how to work with this technology to essentially get certification that they've been exposed to and properly absorbed a level of information that immediately makes them very useful to somebody who's trying to build in this space. And so this is really the second of the long form courses. The first was the Introduction to Theory. Introduction to Theory is a really close look at the Bitcoin white paper. And so in that course, we're trying to define the design intent of the system. So what is the system designed to achieve? And how does Satoshi explain that through the white paper? Now, with the infrastructure course, we're actually looking at the activities that the nodes themselves do and trying to define, essentially their responsibilities, what the rewards are for doing that, and the ways in which they're expected to move the network forward. And that comes, that's right down to them doing their own research and development into better techniques for using the system, them actually being part of the encouraging people to join the network. And certainly we can see that some of the bigger miners in the space at the moment are working to do that. They're actually investing in companies who really don't have anything to do with mining and creating systems that really don't have anything to do with mining to bring people into the network in order to ensure that that mining business is profitable for them in the long term. And I think Bitcoin mining is probably, I think definitely Bitcoin mining is extremely misunderstood, especially when you view it from the lens of BTC, which is where it's just this energy consuming beast that really doesn't actually do much. When you're burning the energy of Austria to secure a floppy disk every 10 minutes, it doesn't really, I don't think there's justification for participating in that if you're looking at it as something that might be a good part of society. Whereas when you're looking at it from the perspective of an unbounded amount of information being secured every 10 minutes in such a way as that everyone can handle it very efficiently with minimal overhead using techniques like SPV and things like that, really, I think that's something that when explained properly, people will really get behind that idea. And so that's what the infrastructure course is really about. I don't think it's just for people who want to get into Bitcoin mining. I think that if you're an entrepreneur or a developer who is wanting to understand how the network will support you and your application as you build out and bring customers into the system, then you should really be doing this course. And because it's really going to give you a very solid grounding as to precisely what's achievable and the things that you should worry about and the things that you don't need to worry about. And certainly in other blockchain projects, there are things that you absolutely need to worry about, which in BSV are really not of concern. So you never need to worry about how many transactions you're doing because of the cost is really so cheap. And really just looking at how do we incentivize or how do the incentives create a situation where they are so cheap and where they're going to stay cheap and in fact probably in the long term get much, much cheaper. And so that's really what the Introduction to Infrastructure is about. But there's more great content coming with the Bitcoin SV Academy. We've got courses on primitive aspects of Bitcoin like hash functions, elliptic curve digital signatures, Bitcoin transactions, all coming out in the next few months, and further long form courses over the next 12 to 24 months. So we're really starting to get some momentum now. The team is a lot bigger than it was in the early days, and which is fantastic. And I just want a big shout out to the team at Air Media who actually build the website for us and put that content in and make it look so great. They do an amazing job. So yeah, thanks very much to them.
Yeah, well said. kind of surrounding everything you said there, there's two main things I think that are important. Number one is what's really, really important that I think the Academy is just, I'm really glad that the mission was started, is because when you go to other educational things about Bitcoin, obviously there's so much misinformation. Like you said, just the explanation for mining and not once do they talk about the longevity of mining or what the goal of mining will be in 20 years when you take some kind of course that's focused on BTC. But what amazed me the most was that not only are there courses that cover that stuff very poorly, but they charge an obscene amount of money to get a certificate for that course.
Yeah.
And for anyone that doesn't know, the Bitcoin SV Academy is completely free. All of these courses, which, I mean this, I'm not just saying this because you're right here in front of me, but the work you did on the theory course, the work that Kapil did on the development course, if you just took those two courses, that is, in my opinion, almost, I mean, it's close to like a professional degree from a university, I think, of when you walk away with a large amount of understanding, or at least knowing the topics that you could dig in further and get an expertise understanding in. So I'm a little biased, but I just think it's so incredible how much content is packed into these courses and that it's available for free. Unlike, I mean, there are courses that you pay $250 to get a certificate in to become like a crypto expert or whatever, and it's such a racket. So I just wanted to add that part in there.
Yeah, and certainly not to blow my own trumpet, but just the feedback that we have had at the Academy, so that there are already a number of companies in the BSV space who insist that all new employees must complete the introduction to theory. I'd certainly like to see that people working in certain roles, in certain capacities, would also be strongly encouraged to do the introduction to Bitcoin infrastructure. But the feedback that we've had from the people who've done introduction to Bitcoin theory is an immediate, massive improvement in their effectiveness in their roles and their ability to understand what people are trying to achieve. And I can imagine in some of those like fairly big companies that have tens or even hundreds of employees, where a lot of them do not have the Bitcoin background that some people do, being able to just send them away and go, okay, just spend a day doing that course, get through it, get the certificate, and then to have that employee come back and be 2-3 times more valuable to that project is pretty huge. And so that feedback tells me that this is a tremendously important resource for the industry and for the space in general. And it kind of, it's, I'm not going to lie, it's a lot of work to put these courses together. And certainly I have to acknowledge that there is an aspect of that does impact the other job that I have, which is, as CEO of Elas. But at the same time, I must acknowledge I could never have come up with the concept that Elas is exploiting if I was not doing this other work. And so I'm sort of torn between, well, I need to spend much more time on this, but at the same time, if I don't do this other thing, other people will not have the same opportunity. And so at the moment, the decision is that I keep going, keep doing both, just make it work. And
we'll talk about Elas in 1 second, but I think what excites me the most, what I really, obviously there's a similar conflict for myself, but what I like the most about it is that I usually try to pick the things that I don't know too much about to cover in course material or something, because then I have to then become an expert in it. So it kind of provides my own incentive to learn more about some of the stuff. Even just providing review of the other coursework too. The subject of Bitcoin touches so many things that I think it is a nice added benefit that you get to stay sharp on some of these things too. But let's talk about Elas, because I think again, I mean, I have like a considerable amount of adoration for like you said, just 4 years ago, you knew kind of nothing about Bitcoin, but now I would consider you by far the most knowledgeable person that I know in script, outside of maybe some people that created it or have worked in it a long time. You frequently mention how much easier it is just to write in script than to use something like script or something like that. But I know that you've been doing a lot of work at Elas. Is it LS, Elas? Is it Elas fine?
Elas.
Okay.
Yeah, I call it Elas.
Do you just want to talk about what you're doing at Elas? I know you have Signifera that came out. I'm sure there are other things that you're working on, but do you just want to, I'll give you the floor to talk about Elas and what you're doing there.
Yeah, sure. So Elas sort of came about after the London CoinGeek conference. It was, you know, I worked out a very straightforward way of defining tokens and then how you could use them to achieve various different things. And I sort of, the strategy I wanted to follow was sort of what Craig Wright was talking about a lot, which is that, you know, the most important thing that you can have in a business is your intellectual property, because that really defines what's yours, what you can use, and only you can use. And so the first thing I did was actually reach out and find a patent attorney and actually patent the process. And, you know, obviously that takes a long time. We're coming to the point where we actually have to publish that globally, which is going to be quite interesting. But that technique has now been extended into multiple different token types. Some of those token types we still haven't actually implemented any expression of them that's on chain at all yet. But certainly the goal is to essentially facilitate the migration of enterprise onto BSV and allow them to take advantage of the metanet and of Bitcoin tokens in the most efficient and user-friendly way possible. And so I think where our fundamental difference is between a lot of the other projects that are out there is that we defined the token without using any particular script. And so we define a token as...
Okay, we're back. A little technical difficulties. I will smash that together in editing, but you were talking about tokens and how you handle tokens. And you said something, I think, about not handling the tokens in the script. So do you want to elaborate on that?
Yeah, sure. So I guess the key aspect of our system is that we treat the actual UTXO itself as the token, or can be actually a group of tokens. And we have a couple of techniques that allow us to change the value and all that sort of stuff. But the key thing is that we are not locked into any single way of doing things. And that effectively allows us to do things in any way that we please. And so this is one of the key things that we are exploiting in Signifera, which was essentially designed as a token-ready wallet and then paired back to be just a Bitcoin wallet. We're actually in the process of creating a kind of a first token product that uses that system, I guess, which will probably be released in the next couple of months, but it's just being sort of going through the first proof of concept type testing in the UK at the moment. And yeah, we're very excited about that. But essentially, by treating the UTXO as the token rather than saying that for the UTXO to be the token, it must have this particular script in it, we can kind of put any script in there that we like and treat the token in the way that the issuer or the platform operator needs in order to achieve the functionality that they're trying to sell to their users. And I think that's so important. You do not want to get into the process of developing some platform and find yourself immediately hamstrung because you're trying to shoehorn some immensely complex script into absolutely everything, even in cases where that script is almost completely unnecessary. And so I really try hard to drive into that idea that you really have the freedom to do things in any way you see necessary. And so there are token protocols out there where the issuer always must countersign. There are token protocols out there where there's no issuer countersignatory. The problem with those is that, well, if you need a system where the issuer countersigns everything, that whole token system doesn't work. And so what we've tried to create is something where it doesn't matter what those requirements are or who needs to countersign, we can accommodate that. And you know, we're very pleased with the utility of what we've created, and certainly in terms of using the MetaNet as a big part of the way that we define the ledgers that we're using to issue those tokens on Bitcoin is a huge part of the value proposition, because it allows us to create these really simple to understand hierarchical relationships within that ledger, and to handle the tokens and any other digital objects or notes or files or whatever it is that we're storing in there as part of that hierarchy.
So I remember, actually, I remember the first time I think I heard you say this was in London when you guys gave like that introductory what became, I guess, the BSV Academy. But you talked about there being two ledgers, right? There's the ledger itself in Bitcoin, but then there's a separate transaction ledger that can be abstracted away from, I mean, there is the transaction ledger no matter what, but you kind of talked about it where like you could essentially overlay another ledger on top of Bitcoin. And now you're talking about how you use the MetaNet for this. Can you just maybe explain, obviously the MetaNet creates a DAG or directed acrylic graph on Bitcoin. You know, could you just maybe talk about how those things are related? And sure. I'm guessing that's what you're talking about, how your token protocol works, right?
A little bit. So I think just jumping back to the London thing, what we were saying there was that there are two DAGs in Bitcoin. So there is one DAG, which is the actual blockchain itself, which is that linked list of blocks that goes all the way back to the Genesis block, and we can define that as a DAG. Its only relation to the transaction DAG that is created every time somebody spends a piece of Bitcoin is that there is a Merkle tree root in each block that represents a subset of those tokens. And so we can break the relationship between the blockchain and the actual public ledger. And so that's really important to understand, because it's key to breaking the insistence, and this comes back to what's being taught outside of BSV, which is that, oh, you know, you've got to wait 6 confirmations or it's not confirmed. And, you know, really to trust zero conf, you have to understand that the block and the transaction really aren't related at all. And, you know, I guess when you're using a network that only confirms a very set number of transactions every 10 minutes, yeah, you're depending on those blocks that your transaction is in there.
Yeah.
So it becomes an important thing, but it's only because they've restricted it in that way. Whereas when there is an unbounded cap on transactions, you can just ignore the blocks. Like you don't, you know, unless you are actually using the block announcement and the Merkle proof or something like that as some sort of functionality within your system, you can just about completely ignore the block discovery process as a user, and even potentially as a platform developer. Now, obviously, if there's a transaction that's in your ledger that you're creating, and I really like this idea that you can, if you do it properly, you can create your own compartmentalized ledger that is only yours, and it's kind of fenced off from everyone else. Only you can create things within it on the public ledger. And so think of the public ledger as this kind of unbounded tableau where everyone in the world is free to kind of come in and doodle and make notes and do whatever they want. And you can create an isolated area that's just for you. And you can make that as big as you want. It's an unlimited Tableau. So if you need more space, just zoom in, make it bigger, keep using so part of what we do is for our customers, and I think sometimes this goes over their head a bit, and we very much stress the importance. Once you create that gated ledger, it's there forever. So you need to create it correctly from the beginning, because if you create it incorrectly and you've got to go back and either remake it from scratch or somehow correct it, like that gets pretty complicated. So, the best way is to really think hard about what you need, what's the structure, how do we want to use that structure, what are the permissions within that structure, who's allowed to write where, and then so what our software essentially does is provide the pen that all of the different users within your private ledger can use to write and sign and create and whatever that is. And so we control that pen through management of keys. And so some of the things that we've developed in order to facilitate that is, so we've extended the MetaNet to create spendable MetaNet nodes. And we feel that's kind of really that the intent of the MetaNet was never for it just to be all these kind of false return outputs that, you have to index. And whereas if you have a spendable node, the great thing about that is that when you want to update that node, you just spend it into its new state. And so if you ever look at a node, so you knew where a node was, you go back to that transaction, it's a very, very simple query. Has this coin been spent?
Right.
It comes back, yes. Well, here's the next state of that node. And even if it's been updated 10 times, it's very simple to trace the life of that coin forward. Whereas if you're using op return style nodes, you actually have to scan the entire blockchain forward in history in order to be able to find all of that activity. It becomes quite, currently it's not a problem because we're only talking, we're still talking, 50 million transactions a month or something. Like it's growing very quickly, but imagine when it's 50 million transactions a minute.
Right.
And so being able to sort of restrict what you need to be looking at in order to track what is happening in your ledger to just a few UTXOs really increases the efficiency of how these systems work a lot. So
right, and well, maybe bringing it back to generalized token talk. I guess for the past 2-3 years, I'm 100%. I know this might sound like I'm just being diplomatic, but I have no problems with there being 10, 20 different token protocols. It really doesn't bother me. Use whatever you want to use. There's some amount of interoperability that you're going to want with, let's just say, things like NFTs, which I'm great. NFTs are great, but I'm not particularly interested in them right now. If there were contracts associated with them, maybe I would be a little bit more interested in them. But but regardless, so maybe there's some desire for interoperability for things like that. I'm really interested in the way that different companies are tackling the token problem, but along the lines of what you had said, for us, when we were looking at this, 3 years ago, it always became a wallet problem to me. I was just like, well, if you want users to hold tokens, then, I don't want to develop a wallet for them, and whatever else. But then I realized as I kind of go through it, like you just kind of talked about, if you just use the Boolean of UTXO set as a token, everything kind of becomes really simple. There's less complicated things that you can do with it. But if you just kind of think about the fact of you have a 0 or a 1 in the fact that something in the UTXO is spent or unspent, that can kind of act as your token as long as it's you color it a certain way, right? So I found it interesting that sometimes it does feel like the token thing is so complex, but I guess my question to you, or has been made so complex when it doesn't necessarily have to be, but my general question to you, I guess, is, even in the last week, I've seen this. There's definitely a lot of like protocol wars going on right now with tokens and things like that. How do you look at this problem right now? How do you look at it in the sense of the ecosystem? Is it okay that there are multiple? To me, I have my own reason for why I think it's okay right now, but how do you look at that, and how do you approach maybe a customer that approaches you and says, why choose this over that, when in some respects maybe that is good enough for them, right? Or but sorry, and to finish my rambling thought here, what you just said I think resonated home to me is that the other dilemma that you kind of have to solve as a company in this space right now is there's something that works right now, but if you're trying to be here in 10 years, that may not work, right? And so you kind of have to balance the short-term gratification with building something that's more sustainable long-term, assuming we get to that point. But then there's also the chicken before the egg problem of, if it works right now and it can get us volume right now, then maybe you just go for it, right? Even if it's not the most apt scaling solution. So my rant is over there, but I guess what are your general thoughts about that as you see everything evolve?
Look, I certainly believe that there is room for multiple different, token systems, token protocols. I've worked on more than one. I don't think that, well, I guess let me think about what I'm saying a little bit carefully here. If you're thinking about moving into developing a token system, I think what you really need to consider is, rather than looking at it from the perspective of how does the token system work and blah, 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 getting lost in the weeds of that, really think about what it is that you're trying to achieve. And so this is what I keep having to tell people who come to us, and they're like, oh, we know we want to use blockchain, and we know we want to do this. And my response to them is always, well, go and think about what you want to do and just forget the blockchain. Right. Because my job or our job is that when you come to us and say, hey, we want to do this, our job is then to define how you achieve that within the bounds of what we're capable of implementing in our token system. And so the choice shouldn't be, oh, is this token system better or is that token system better? It's, can I do what I want to do with this token system? And is it the right choice for me in the long term? And, so, and with that, like, I think it's often a case that someone gets to a point where it's like, well, there's actually 2 or 3 different token systems that I could use to do what I'm trying to do here. Well, then it comes down to, commercially, I'm sure there's a relationship there. You probably know some of the people who are running that token system. That's where that all comes into it. And then it becomes a choice for your business. But I certainly don't think we should be, there's going to be some overall winner in the token, rumble in the jungle or anything like that. It's going to be certainly some will not make it. And there have been moments here where I thought I wasn't going to make it, but I certainly don't feel that way today. We've had probably our best week in a long time. It's been a really just amazing meetings every day this week. It's been fantastic, but certainly I think we'll see some drop away. We'll see new ones come. There's always room for new ideas. And I mean, this is the great thing about a boundless ledger. There's boundless room for new ideas. And so I'm certainly not complacent. I think at the moment that we probably have one of the more efficient systems. At the same time, the development level of our tools is definitely not anywhere near that of some of the other companies out there, like Tokenized, like Run, who really have very stable libraries. They've got massive use. We have a long way to go to catch up to those guys. And so, in general, I'm just extremely encouraged by the amount that's happening in the space. And I look forward to seeing everyone succeed. We're not here to trample anyone or or run over the top. It's just about making our own way forward. And look, we have to collectively onboard the whole world. That's coming in 3 to 10 years. And there's a lot of room for success in that.
Yeah.
And so from that perspective, I don't worry about what other people do, or whether we win a customer or not. It doesn't matter so much to me, just because I know that there's so much opportunity coming our way. Just keep taking the next step forward and be the best that you can. And that's what you have to do.
Well, that's a good general lesson, I think, for the pie is so large that there's no reason to fight over the one small slice that we have right now, in my opinion.
Yep.
But maybe if we could just generalize the conversation a little bit further to, so thinking longevity of transactions that you're making today, everything pretty much data, and anything data written to the blockchain right now is pretty much done using op return or false return, as you call it, which is what it is. But can you talk about, just if let's say you're someone that knows absolutely nothing about what that means, generally what that is, and then what are the limitations of doing that? I know for you,
Okay.
For example, obviously you don't think in terms of just dump things in op return. You're probably thinking a little bit more, here's how we can handle this in the script itself.
Yep.
So just if you could just express that to people and how you're thinking about that long term, and as opposed to how things are being done today.
Sure. Well, firstly, I'd just like to go ahead and clarify that some of the stuff that we do use false return outputs. And so essentially the main difference between I guess what you might call a functional Bitcoin script or a spendable output and a false return is that a false return output is there. It's immutable. You can never change it, but you can't do anything with it. There's no means for you to pick that up as a digital object and spend it into a new state.
Right.
And so whatever you record in that output is fixed forever. Now, what that means in terms of a token system is that you need to have an agent that sits outside of the blockchain that's actually capturing all of those outputs and then doing another set of work and has its own token state database.
Right.
And then it is that token state database that the users interact with. And effectively, there is no token state that exists in any immediate form on chain. In order to understand the token state, you need the totality of all of the history of those tokens. Whereas with a system that uses spendable outputs to hold the tokens as UTXOs, the token state database is what is on the public ledger at that moment. And so where a token is in that output that's spendable by that person, well, that is the state of the token. And I think that's probably the core difference. And so op return or false return outputs are great when you're doing, so one of the techniques that we've been developing for a while is a way to capture data that's being written into like a legacy type database, like an SQL database, or some kind of regular internet type database, and catching those as events that are tracked with a token, but the actual event data is just written in false return outputs. Sure. So you can rebuild the token state by chasing the token down its history, but the actual data that's being written into the database itself is just captured in these unspendable outputs. And so we do it that way because it's efficient for the miners. So miners straight away, as soon as they get those false return outputs, they just chuck them out. They don't care. They're not spendable. They don't need to do anything with them. They don't have to hold on to them. So it's efficient management of the UTXO set on our part. But it's still immutable data. It's still timestamped in a block. It has all of these great properties that still make it exceptionally useful. So, I think there are people who are saying, oh, you shouldn't use them for anything. There are people who say, or who build their systems around using them for everything. But I think there's a good middle ground where you can use them where they're appropriate, but then you have all of these additional capabilities that open up to you when you start using spendable outputs as the tokens themselves. And so, yeah.
So two things I think that I would tack onto that. So the first, I've always thought, and tell me if you disagree with this, I guess, but I've always kind of thought of op return data as, the main benefit you get from that is the flood network properties of Bitcoin. You get to essentially flood data to the distributed system. Because like you said, it can just be chopped off and thrown away at any time. But the point being that if there is a node connected to the network that wants to keep it, you can get it to them very rapidly, and you can get it to, obviously a distributed set of nodes if it's not just one. But maybe that means that, for example, the core nodes in this Mandala network, whatever, get rid of it, but the outer layer can get it really instantaneously and keep it if they want to keep some kind of op return database or whatever, right? That to me seems like that's not invaluable. So like, just to think, oh, well, if the miners can prune it, therefore there's no point in doing it, that's definitely not invaluable to have, right? And then I think the other piece that you just mentioned, you're calling them tokens, which they technically are, but like, for example, if you wanted to have permissioned access to something, and the data is in a script, putting it into op return doesn't really give you permission access. You can't do anything really uniquely interesting with it, except for maybe just encrypt it and then distribute the decryption key some other way, right?
Yes.
So you're calling them token. Obviously, when we say token, it means so many different things in Bitcoin, but in some way, what you're also getting at is that the data can be inserted into a script where access can be managed in the same way as you can manage access to a token. Would that be fair to say?
Absolutely. And this is something that we're working on right now. It's really about how you, as the platform creator, need that data to work. Like if it's a dynamic piece of information that's changing all the time, well, then maybe you keep that piece of data in a spendable token, and each time that data is updated, you spend the token into a new state. So you still have a record of every time that information state changed. And in fact, if you do it that way, it's so easy to track that history, because as soon as you can see the token, you can see the full history of that data all the way back to the beginning with very little effort. You can read the previous transaction that last held that token state straight out of the new transaction. And you can scan all the way back to the history in a very simple manner. The difference with op return type stuff is that the op return outputs themselves are typically spent with, or created, I should say, with coins that have quite minimal association with each other. So typically, if you're doing things in a wallet that is spending these and creating these op return outputs, it doesn't select a specific coin. It just picks one at random and goes bang and writes the output. And then that coin is set aside. And then the next time you want to do something to that token, it picks a totally different coin and makes an op return output that relates to the previous one. But so when we go back to this kind of the transactional DAG, there's no edge between those two outputs that is readable on the public ledger. You have to pull both of those outputs out and understand that they relate to each other. I feel like it's a lot of extra work to do, and really it doesn't, without adding any real benefit.
Sure. Okay, so I'm trying not to keep these, I'm trying to keep all these videos under an hour. So I'll end it with this question. But I guess if you have anything you want to tack on, go for it. But maybe my general question that I would have for the first piece of it would be like, what do you want, as someone who's a lot more in the weeds of Bitcoin than maybe the average developer that comes into this space or whatever, what would your advice be as like, if you want to start building something? I'm trying to think how to word this better, but I guess my point being like, what should they be focusing on that other people aren't focusing on that, for example, like, don't just come in and just start, making NFT, whatever. Maybe you want to, if you can, but I guess, what is there that's not really explored in Bitcoin that you'd like to see more innovation in? And then I'll ask that first, and I'll ask another question.
Okay, I think what I've been a little bit disappointed to see is that a lot of the initial platforms have just been replications of what already exists in crypto. And, when I tell people what I do, and it's something I kind of struggle with, is like, the first thing I always say is, we have nothing to do with crypto. And, I don't want to be associated with them. When people think about what I do, I don't want people to go, oh, he's a crypto guy. I want people to understand that crypto has become its own sort of microcosm of this insane kind of speculation machine. And what I've seen a lot of is that people are bringing that activity into BSV and using it as this vehicle to create kind of nonsense. So I think the first thing to think about is, why do you need a token? Because it comes back to the etymology of the word. Look at the definition of token. Nothing is just a token. A token is a means to represent something else. And so we have so many things that are out there where the token is just a token. And effectively what that's saying is that it's totally meaningless. There's whatever value that token is given by a speculative marketplace actually doesn't relate to anything real. And so if you're coming into this space and you're thinking tokens, well, first understand what that token represents as a real world right to a good or service. And if you can understand that, that's kind of 50% of the journey, because then you can think about what you want to do. What is it that you want your customers to be able to do better than they can do today? What's your value proposition? And then the next part of that job is to figure out how to implement that on Bitcoin. And it doesn't necessarily mean that you even need a token. You might be using Bitcoin just as a means to access something, as a means of storing something, as a means of controlling what people see, like, whatever it is. But figure that part out first and understand your value proposition really clearly. And that's the most important step. So I would not worry so much about getting into the weeds of developing blockchain, understanding all that kind of stuff. Focus on the user journey. What is it that you're providing people? And because I see so much that that's what's not happening, people are solely focused on creating something that they don't understand what it is and selling it to people who have even less understanding than them of what it is.
Yeah,
and that's not what we want.
I guess related to that question is, I just happened to be watching this video from Shawway's Bitcoin class that he did with Craig. But they were talking about this whole, idea of how you could actually have NFTs that are only available to a certain hardware device, right? I was like, well, that's quite interesting, right? If you could buy a JPEG that actually only you could see on your physical device, that's interesting, right? But I guess the underlying point of my question is that, like, or my point here is that it's, I think, really difficult to look behind the veil and realize, oh, there's a lot more that's possible with this system than immediately meets the eye. Or because if you're trapped in the mindset of what are the other technologies in this space doing, you kind of just be like, you kind of go into copycat mode or a little bit, or for lack of a better word. And I'll put the disclaimer that I have absolutely no problem with NFTs or NFT markets or whatever else. I think my only complaint really is that there are no contracts. So I've actually been looking a lot into like this Ricardian contract concept that Ian Grigg came up with, and the fact that none of these NFTs come with these contracts is actually quite bonkers. And obviously we're seeing the effects of that anyway.
I probably won't be popular. I probably won't be popular for saying this, but I think NFTs and the way that they're being done is totally unimaginative. And I kind of liken them back to trash pail kid cards that we had as kids. But even those, the rarity was in that you were the only one who could look at it when it was in your hand. Whereas with all of these tokens, I can just copy paste the image. Like yes, it absolutely comes back to what Craig said. You know, how do you lock it down? And certainly there are techniques for doing that. And there are techniques that will allow you to then transfer the right to that image to somebody else and lock the previous receiver out. You know, much like the way that we lock people out of accessing, you know, streaming movies after their rental period is expired. Like, all of the same techniques can be applied via Bitcoin to these items, if you like.
Right. The thing I've noticed actually, like in the past couple of weeks, a lot of, like, you know, internet celebrities or whatever that are getting asked about NFTs and whatever else, their now introduction to it is the thought process that if you own this NFT, you'll be able to bring it into the metaverse, which God knows what that actually even means anymore. But I found it interesting that I think the marketing for it has actually shifted to literally their mindset is, if I own this, I can bring it into the metaverse without ever having to think about the fact of, wait, so that blockchain will be the blockchain behind the metaverse. There will be one metaverse that who owns it. None of that is thinking, but the marketing of it has kind of transitioned to this really seedy.
Yeah, I don't know what people are thinking. You know, is Facebook going to integrate Tron, EOS, Solana, blah, 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 all these other different blockchains, Ethereum, into their thing? Or are they just going to come up with their own and go, you guys can all go take a jump and we're going to do it all here anyway? You know, that's probably what I could see them doing. Like, they don't know crypto anything. But crypto seems to think the world owes them everything. And I would just say to crypto, like, you guys need to wake up to yourselves.
Yeah. You've
been taking advantage of people for a very long time, and the door is closing on that happy period in your life.
Yeah. Okay, well, I thank you for doing this. I'm sure I will force you to do this again some other time.
I don't feel forced at all, Connor.
But I do want to, you know, again, plug the course that you mainly architected that is on the BSV Academy site right now. I encourage everyone to take it. Like you said, anyone that we work with that doesn't know anything about this technology, I immediately point them to those courses because they're free. Again, that's crazy. Yep. Absolutely crazy that they are free compared to the other stuff that's out there that you might be forced to pay for.
Yeah, I think just caveat, I think, so certainly these introduction courses probably will always be free, but I don't think that necessarily means that everything that is offered through the Bitcoin SV Academy will always be free. So there is a strategy at a certain point to begin making content that you do need to pay for, and especially for us to be able to deliver that content in kind of a live setting. We've already been experimenting with that. You know, you've been doing amazing work with the guys in Karachi, and I think there's going to be a lot more of that type of thing happening. And, you know, if anyone is out there from a university who would be interested in some kind of collaboration, please do reach out, because it's something that we're very actively working on and keen to expand in the academy. So
yeah, that's well said. Okay, well, thanks for taking the time here, and
it's a great pleasure. Thank you very much, Connor.
We'll leave it at that. All right. Thanks, Brendan.
All right.
Let's stop.